Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Grace Wong, Chair of the Chinese Canadian Museum Society of British Columbia, and it's a great pleasure to welcome you all to the opening of two new exhibitions here in the Chinese Canadian Museum's temporary home in Chinatown's historic Hon Sing building. Let me especially welcome our two provincial ministers, Minister Melanie Mark, Minister George Chow, members of the Louis and Guichon families, the Grant family from Musqueam, colleagues from a number of cultural institutions that we collaborate with, and of course, my fellow directors of the Chinese Canadian Museum. As we begin, I would like to acknowledge that Vancouver Chinatown is located on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Musqueam, Squamish, and Tsleil-Waututh nations. As we work diligently to protect Chinese Canadian heritage, we also strive to create meaningful collaborations with the communities whose lands we occupy and whose histories are interconnected with our own. Today is Red Dress Day, the National Day of Awareness for murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls. We stand in solidarity with all communities who have been impacted and believe in our common humanity and the need for collective efforts toward greater inclusion, equality, and diversity. I would like to invite Elder Larry Grant to formally welcome us here today.
Thank you, and welcome to our esteemed visitors this evening. CCM to CIA, Ayatlak Gonasquich, he Tenitan at Masquim. Clark says Johannes, because he looks at the Hunas, Emik Netten, Koshwi to E, to Shant at Masquim. Stay Gonas Johannes, Capelano, he Holtimoto, set us something neat as well up, he Hilak Dala. When I finish Qualawan, couldn't see. Guatemala, Shui Tana Museum, Canadian Chinese Museum, Guatemala, the Mugstem, all, because the Chinas, Shwali, Kushwai to E, it's Chinatown, High Tep, Siam, Nasia, Tsiasam. I want to say thank you for having me here this evening to do the land acknowledgement on the traditional, ancestral, unceded lands of the Hunkaminam speaking Musqueam people. And it's my pleasure to do as our ancestors had done in the past and raise my hands in welcome to all of you here this evening. It's really especially significant for me as we grew up here also in Strathcona, Chinatown, as well as the reserve lands that our mother had lived on. And we actually knew the H.Y. Louis family, and our father was connected with the H.Y. Louis family prior to them acquiring that first warehouse on Georgia Street. It's something that in my lifetime, my memory of that warehouse was going up the stairs and coming down the cargo chute. Yeah. And my older brother and I, we used to do that, bang, 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 up and down after school. And then one day, when we went in there, they said, you kids can't play in here anymore. No more. So my understanding of this is whatever share our father had in that warehouse was lost in a gambling game. So we were no longer welcome to play in there. So that's my connection to H.Y. Louis family, and a younger brother went to school with in the same era as Brandt had gone to. Howard was part of that group, that younger group that went to school in Chinatown. So I just wanted to have that connection besides the land connection, so that we are still a big part of the growth of Chinatown and the years that we have had with it. So I just want to say that, and I want to say it again. Kalat konsitia tala, deswala pa hui namat, hui ti, des anslamukat from Askum, high tepikasium, nasya tsiasam. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Elder Grant, and for the acknowledgement, for the welcome, and starting us off with sharing those stories and reflecting our interconnectedness. Thank you. I'm really excited today because we come together to celebrate the opening of these two exhibitions, A Tale of Two Families, Generations of Intercultural Communities and Family Lessons, and Seeds to Success, Story of the H.Y. Louis Family. We're also at the beginning of Asia Heritage Month, and I can't think of a better way of celebrating than with sharing the incredible stories embodied in these two exhibits. When I first learned about A Tale of Two Families showing at Royal BC Museum in 2020, I remember noting to our board and staff that, oh, wouldn't it be wonderful to have our Chinese Canadian Museum in Vancouver hosting this so that many more people would be able to see it in this location. I remember in our programs and outreach committee and discussing, but it would also provide an opportunity to showcase even more stories of the H.Y. Louis family. And so here we are with these two exhibitions. I want to thank the CCM team of Sarah Ling, our programs and exhibition manager, who created the Seeds to Success exhibit. And Sarah was doing this in collaboration with Catherine Clement, support of our curatorial committee, John Adams, Dr. Henry Yu, Dr. Imogene Lim. I would also like to acknowledge Ms. Alicia Dubois, CEO of Royal BC Museum, Dr. Sui Chung, curator of BCM and curator of A Tale of Two Families. I'm delighted that they join us here today as well. And I would particularly also really like to say thank you so much to Joanne Chan of London Drugs Foundation. Joanne has been so wonderful in her cooperation to support the preparation of this exhibit. So thanks very much, Joanne. The Chinese Canadian Museum was founded in 2020 as an independent nonprofit society to establish and operate a public museum in British Columbia with a provincial mandate dedicated to honoring Chinese Canadian history, contributions, and living heritage. We strive to tell stories from the perspective of Chinese Canadians and reveal the integral connections of Chinese Canadian history to the larger narrative of the history of BC and the history of our country. Sharing these exhibits and stories on pioneer Chinese families, such as the H.Y. Louis family, who have helped to build the communities, the province, and the country we know today, are central to the development of our museum. One of the themes that we will follow at CCM is intercultural communities. And A Tale of Two Families is a wonderful example of that. It shows two families settling in different parts of the province, yet with many commonalities. By highlighting the intercultural values and practices of the Gauchon family and the Louis Citeau family since the Gold Rush era, visitors can explore themes of inclusion and resilience through a display of their travails, successes, and contributions to the history of BC. Seeds to Success, Story of the H.Y. Louis family, continues to examine stories of entrepreneurship, resilience, and intergenerational lessons through the family history of H.Y. Louis. Resilience, family values, and sense of community are planted through generations, from Hokyat Louis to his children, his grandchildren, and I believe beyond. While our temporary home is limited in the amount of space we can work with to display these exhibits, we look forward to our permanent home, the Wing Sang building just down the street, where we can more fully explore and showcase such exhibits and stories reflecting the diversity of Chinese Canadian experience and diversity of locations where the Chinese Canadians settled. As I mention our new home, I want to acknowledge and thank the provincial government for providing the $27.5 million for the acquisition of the Wing Sang building and support of the Chinese Canadian Museum. Minister Melanie Mark, as Minister of Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport, took such a key role in making this happen, and it gives me great pleasure to invite Minister Mark to give her remarks.
Good afternoon, everyone. Simgaget, Siguramanak, Gibbet Wiltsuk. My name's Melanie Mark. My Niska name's Lahaikwiskak. I'm very proud to be the MLA for Vancouver Mount Pleasant and Minister for Tourism, Arts, Culture, and Sport. It is just such an honor to be here with all of you, to see all of you here today. Larry, thank you for being here. Thank you for sharing your words. I believe it is so important that we follow protocol and we really acknowledge the stewardship of the First Nations and Indigenous people that have been the caretakers of this land, but also the importance of storytelling. As a minister, I get lots of notes, lots of binders. I read a lot, but our cultures are oral. I'm a storyteller. I learn best by hearing other people's stories. And that is why it's just it's so exciting to be here today. Grace, thank you for your leadership. Raymond, the board, all of the members of the board that are here. Can you raise your hands, please, so we can show how many people have been working behind the scenes to make it history, really. The first Chinese Canadian museum is here, right here in historic Vancouver's Chinatown. Give yourselves a round of applause. Part of my mandate commitment from Premier John Horgan, who sends his regrets and congratulations to everyone, was to ensure that we brought the vision to life, to leave a legacy here for the next generation. So yes, this is a temporary exhibit. This exhibit's going to be on until December, which is outstanding. And please spread the word to make sure that everyone comes in here. It will make Sarah very happy, right, Sarah? All of your hard work. It is a temporary exhibit, but a historic building. And the Wing Sang building is absolutely outstanding. I believe it's going to be open in June. I don't want to June next year. A lot of effort went into making that dream possible, and I'm glad that our government was able to be a partner. And so I just wanted to really acknowledge everyone's hard work to get here. For today, I want to acknowledge the Louis family. I want to acknowledge the Guichon family. I think it's so important when we talk about the tale of two families and the seeds to success. The very limited time that I got to get the speed dating tour with the team was about the power of pictures. I was telling Brant about pictures. I'm the person in my family who takes all the pictures, and everyone says, oh, not again. But it's important. Our history is important. How we tell our story, not only of the victories, the hardships, those of us who survived. I think we were talking about politics. You know, what was the former provincial government doing back in the 20s with the Chinese community? And here we are, how far we've come. But also how much more we have to do, knowing that the fight against racism isn't over. That sense of exclusion isn't over. We've still got to continue fighting, but we also have to celebrate. I would be remiss to not share that I am the first First Nations woman to ever get elected in BC's history. And I say that because 3 of my grandparents went to residential school. So the idea that we were going to be wiped out, I'm a testament of resilience. And when I think of the Chinese community and the resilience and the determination, not only to survive, but thrive, there's this commonality that I always talk about paddling together. The reconciliation, and Larry, you talked about it, the Indigenous community and the Chinese community, and Grace, you talked about it. That's the vision of the Chinese Canadian Museum, is showing the inclusion, showing the work that we've done together, the Guishan family and their partnership with the Chinese community. That's why museums matter, because we have to tell our stories. There are so many aspects, so many chapters in our rich history that we have to share, and I'd be remiss to not mention Alicia, our new CEO of the Royal Canadian, sorry. I gave you a new title, Royal BC Museum. You know, people often have asked me, they've asked me recently as the minister responsible for the Royal BC Museum about its exhibits. And we have so many stories to tell. And in many ways, I feel like we're just getting started. So congratulations to everyone for making today possible. Thank you, Grace, for acknowledging that it's Red Dress Day. Everyone should be wearing red and acknowledging, especially here. We're in historic Chinatown, but also let's not forget what happened to Indigenous women and girls on the streets of the downtown east side. So everyone, thank you so much. Congratulations.
For your words and all of your ongoing support. I note that our CCM is in Minister Mark's riding, and that's wonderful. Yes, that's right. I'm now delighted to call on Minister George Chow to give his remarks. Minister Chow has been a champion of the Chinese Canadian Museum since its inception and has chaired the working group committee, which established so many of the foundations for CCM. Minister Chow.
Thank you, Grace, and good afternoon, everyone. I'm George Chow. Now, my riding, it's in Vancouver, Fraserville. The boundary is from 49th Avenue all the way to Fraser River, Fraser Street to Burnaby. So it's quite far from Chinatown, but I've been around Chinatown forever, so you know that. So I'd like to acknowledge that we're on the unceded territory of the Musqueam, Squamish, and the Tsleil-Waututh nations, and we're sharing this land with the hospitality given by our Indigenous people. And as Elder Grant and also Minister Mark said, today is Red Shirt Day. And I think what I heard from the opposition that really moved me today is that, you know, the Indigenous women population in Canada is only 1 out of 20. But the number of women that were in the justice system, it's over 50%. So I think we have a lot of work to do. And I say that because this museum is going to help that. This museum is not just going to be about the past, it's about the future. So I'm very happy that we got to where we get to, because the history of the Chinese Canadian Museum dates back almost a decade or more. The federal government made an apology on the head tax issue in 2006 in the Parliament, and the community has been talking about the Chinese Canadian Museum ever since. And we are very happy that as the provincial government, we established the first Chinese Canadian Museum, as Melanie Mark, the minister, has said. So I'm very happy. And of course, I'm excited to learn about these 2 families that are being featured in the exhibit. And the Ixchului family, I don't know the family well, but I certainly know of the family when I landed here in Canada in 1965. Now, a lot of us are immigrants. We took different journeys to come to Canada. Like my grandfather, who came in 1911, and my father in 1955, and I came in 1965. When I came, I had to basically settle here because that's all my father could do. And I stay in the SRO, the single room occupancy hotel, at the corner of Union and Main. And this is now torn down because of Georgia Viaduct. And looking at the back of that is the Hogan's Alley. And further along, it's a H.Y. Louis company, the loading bay. So the reason why I said that was because when I came over, I already finished my Chinese school, primary school. And I was wondering, the Chinese word, that last character I cannot pronounce. So, and it says H.Y. Louis, it doesn't help me. So I had to really find out to say, oh, what does that last word say? And that's why the H.Y. Louis name actually stuck in my mind for all that time. And of course, you know, all the story here. And of course, in terms of the Gishen family, I remember Lieutenant Governor, prior to the COVID, she comes to our annual Chinatown parade. And she was there on Kiefer Street, and we were very, very moved by her participation. And so it's a great story, as Minister Mark says, stories is what make it interesting, and I'm very, very happy here today. So my hope is this project, I gotta get to the storyline here too, creates more understanding, empathy, and recognition, and that truly is what we want to do. And I think this is why we established the Chinese Canadian Museum. And I thank all of you, all the staff, the board members who work on the working group, and now the board. And they're all volunteers. And thank you very much. And I look forward to talking with all of you. And let's get into the permanent headquarters. But we need a ways to go because we need to raise some more money. Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So our feature today is about two families who have contributed so much to the fabric of British Columbia and to Canada. I'm very pleased to welcome Mr. Peter Rose, who is representing the Guichon family, whose intergenerational experiences are featured in the Tale of Two Families that are here at the exhibit. Peter's parents, Mrs. Hildy Rose and her late husband, operated the Coachella Cattle Company and the historic Coachella Hotel for decades. Peter, would you please come and give your remarks?
So I was supposed to be accompanied by my mother here, and she was going to do a lot of the talking, but she unfortunately a few days ago came down with COVID, so she's unable to attend. She's on the mend, she's doing great, she's 87, and she is one heck of a socialite. It pains her to not be here, I gotta say. And she just loves history, and she's an incredible gatherer of people and gatherer of goodwill and an amazing giver of food and good times and social getting together. And so it's really too bad you're not getting to meet her tonight, but she's an amazing person, as I say. It pains her to not be here. But because of her having to be here and me just taking over kind of last minute, I'm a little bit unprepared, but I'll do my best. So anyway, I must say I'm really, really honored to be here and be part of this day today. And I certainly do appreciate very much all of the work, all of the research that has gone into making this happen. As I was introduced, my name is Peter Rose. I'm actually an architect in Vancouver with my own company, and we design custom luxury homes, mainly in Vancouver, but throughout the province, even up in Coachella on Nicola Lake. And I live in Vancouver with my wife and two college-age children. I was born in Kamloops to my parents, Guy and Hilda Rose, and was brought up on our family cattle ranch at nearby Coachella in the Nicola Valley. The ranch, called the Colchana Cattle Company, serves as much of the backdrop for the story of the Guichon family in BC, and it's, of course, where my earliest memories are rooted. Although my last name is Rose, I'm also a Guichon. My grandmother on my father, Guy Rose's side, was a Guichon. And just to help illustrate that, I'm going to read a short piece of text from a book on my parents' and family history that was very recently, like in the last couple of weeks, completed. And this will give you some informal context on how the Guichon family came to be in BC. So this is the book, and I think, Brant, you may be familiar with this company, Echo Memoirs, Echo Storytelling. I think they did a book on your family. Little plug for them. Anyone who wants to get their family history down and done beautifully, Echo Memoirs, they're amazing. Amazing people. They really, they are storytellers, and they love helping people put their stories and their histories in print. So I'm just going to read this little bit here, and then I'll get back to my bit. So on the cover of this book, Those Were the Days, that's my parents a number of years ago on the hill behind the Colchana Hotel, which is on a couple of those boards right there. And the Colchana Hotel was built by my great-grandfather in 1908. So here we go, building the cattle empire. Ranching goes back 2 generations on Guy's mother's side. The Guichons grew up in the Savoie, a renowned wine-producing region in France. The 4 brothers, Laurent, Pierre, Charles, and Joseph, who would become Guy's grandfather, read tales of the gold rush while in France, and with heady dreams of getting rich, set out for San Francisco. They quickly realized what brutally hard work mining was, with little promise of a return, and proceeded north to British Columbia, where the 3 eldest set up a supply and pack train business. Joseph joined Cataline, a mule packing outfit established in the 1850s by the famous and eccentric Jean-Jacques Coe, and from Yale, BC, he packed horses up to Barkerville in the Cariboo Gold Rush region. Stacks of letters still exist in France from the 4 brothers trying to sound hopeful to keep their parents from despairing back in France, says Guy, my dad. He still has 1 letter written in French that his grandpa wrote to his mother with a message for the kind soul back in France who had loaned him the money to buy a pack wagon. Translated, the letter reads, "Please tell Mr. Guru, I'm sorry I missed the payment on the wagon this year. However, the road is getting better and next year looks like a good year and I will be able to pay him in full." Poor Mr. Guru, who advanced the money in France to this kid and probably thought he'd never see it again, says Guy, but my grandfather was an honest man and his benefactor got repaid in full. Grandpa Joseph never did succumb to the lure of panning for gold, but among the family treasures back in France, there's a single heavy envelope that is filled with gold dust just for prosperity. The brothers, smart businessmen all, invested their profits in cattle, expanding the small herd that Joseph had collected while working for Cataline. Charles returned to France, but wisely retained his business interest. After 10 years, the other 3 brothers moved to Mammoth Lake in the Merritt area. Pierre died shortly thereafter, far too young, and the remaining brothers, Laurent and Joseph, sold the Ray Creek Ranch, which the Garthwaite family bought and owned to this day just outside of Merritt. The following year, Laurent married Perrone Ray just outside Victoria, BC, and Joseph Perrone's sister Josephine. And Joseph married Perrone's sister Josephine. Laurent and Joseph and their wives moved to Chaperon Lake in the interior of BC, where they built and shared a large log house and became agricultural pioneers, experimenting with cold frames around their vegetable gardens. Over 3 years, the brothers built up a herd of some 1,400 cattle. In 1882, Joseph and Laurent parted company, and Joseph and Josephine settled at the mouth of the Nicola River near Colchana. Joseph liked the name, which is Salish for the place where the willows grow. And I can attest to the willows still grow like crazy there, because I go there a lot. It was there that he began to build the cattle empire that would become known as the Guichon Ranch. Laurent sold his interests at Chaperon to the BC Cattle Company and moved to the community that is now Ladner. He became one of the most successful farmers in the area, and the town where he lived was initially named after him, Port Guichon. Many years later, it would be renamed after farmer, fisherman, and gold miner Thomas Ladner. So Ladner used to be Port Guichon. Guy, my dad, owns a painting of the town when it was Port Guichon. It hangs in one of their bedrooms at the ranch. Just about done with this part. In cattle and ranching circles, Joseph quickly earned a reputation for having the best imported livestock in BC. He was the first to bring Herefords to this region, and by 1890, with 2,000 head of cattle, the ranch was the biggest stock operation in the Nicola Valley. In 1904, Joseph not only bought 10,000 acres of hay and grazing land and 1,700 head of cattle from the BC Cattle Company, but also began to build. A new Quilchana Hotel was built in 1908, and a well-stocked general store followed in 1912. To build the store, he brought in a stonemason from England. Life was good for the former gold rush packer. So that's just a little bit of that part of the story, and I just have a bit more here. So the next chapter in this story was the parallel story of my father and his Guichon cousin, Gerard. My father graduated in agricultural sciences from UBC in the early 1950s, and shortly after, he and cousin Gerard Guichon bought the cattle company from the elder Guichons. They split it in two, and each ran successful ranching operations from the resulting huge properties. I myself and all my siblings worked on the ranch and developed a deep love for the land and the lifestyle there. So on this board here behind the wagon, that's the old general store that my great-grandfather built in 1912. And when I was like 12, 13 years old, I started pumping gas and stocking shelves and everything. And anyway, just as a little sidebar here now, I should say, I neglected to think of the wonderful welcome that Larry gave, and it makes me think back to when we were operating this store when I was young, well, right up until very recently. We're just a few kilometers down the lake from the Upper Nicola Band, and when we grew up, I mean, just to expand on it a bit, I rode the school bus into Merritt, and we whiteys were like a tiny minority. It was pretty much about 85% First Nations people, and not only did we, of course, go to church at the little reserve church at the Upper Nicola Band every Sunday, but we had a lot of the local First Nations working on the ranch with us in all capacities. Harvey McLeod, who is now the chief of the Upper Nicola Band, used to manage our store. And Harvey's a good friend of mine. I know him well. And I should also say one of the great things that my dad did, and I know Gerard Guichon at the other end of the ranch did too, was really cultivate wonderful, deep friendships and relationships with our native neighbors. My dad died nearly 3 years ago now, and he actually had two funerals. One was in Merritt, in the church that he helped build there, but the other one was at the little reserve church on the Upper Nicola Band, and my dad was really, really honored. It was just such a great friendship. He was really, really honored by the chief and some of the elders there. His casket was draped in a buckskin vest that was made by our friends there, and he was given his last rites in the Okanagan language as well. And I know for a fact there his passing was a real loss for those people, and some of our connection, you know, back in the day when I was working in the store and everything, we didn't have the internet, everyone wasn't all dialed into so many different things that, you know, it's called social media, but it doesn't necessarily bring you together. But back then, you really had to communicate with and get along with your neighbors, and I think that's one of the things that my dad and his cousin Gerard did beautifully well, was cultivate and keep those relationships going. So anyway, sorry for that sidebar. So although I live in Vancouver now, I also maintain a vacation home on former ranch property on Nicola Lake, where my wife, kids, and many friends love to spend time and keep our connection to the beautiful Nicola Valley, where my French ancestors settled. And it's funny, I was telling Grace earlier, so I was telling someone earlier, it's kind of funny that my dad was born and raised in Kitsilano, at 3rd and Balsam. Then he went to university, and after university moved to take over the ranch. I was born on the ranch, and then after I graduated from university, I moved to Vancouver, and my first apartment was at 2nd and Balsam, like literally a stone's throw for when my dad's family home was. We just did kind of a cross-generational skip over. Little thing that's kind of interesting here, just in terms of how long people were in the area there. So my ancestors pioneered the area in the 1870s, but one of the things I did when I was a kid was I drove the tractor. Of course, every ranch kid has to drive the tractor, and I'd be stacking hay at 1 a.m. sometimes, and oftentimes my partner driving the other tractor was someone from the reserve, and we'd be stacking hay in fields that were called the O'Rourke or the McGuinness, and these were named after settlers that were there before my ancestors in the 1870s. So those guys must have been up there in the 1850s or something, and they already had their little homesteads, and my ancestors bought those from them when they started going. And of course, it goes without saying that the First Nations people were in there from time immemorial. Some of those fields, which are buried like way, way back in the ranch, our ranch at the time was well over 30,000 acres. And those fields, the O'Rourke and the McGuinness, were way, way up the road. But way up, further up the road was one of those little pocket Indian reserves where the Sam family live. I don't know if you know the Sams, but they were up there just forever, right? And we all cross paths every day, and there's a whole bunch of those little kind of pocket reserves all over there. I'd just like to say, like many assembled here of Chinese descent, my dad was proud of his French heritage, and he spoke French fluently, having learned it in the home as a child, because his mom was a Guichon and she was just a generation removed. And he spoke it whenever he could. And also, I'm sure, like the Louis family, he tried to keep our European heritage alive with keeping in contact with friends and relatives there, and making regular trips to France and Germany. Now, as with the Louis family and their historic core business, the Guichon name is associated not only with ranching, but you can name pretty well any profession or trade, and there will be a Guichon or a Rose in it. Doctors, veterinarians, lawyers, investment brokerage owners, entrepreneurs, engineers of all types, the typical high-achieving immigrant scenario. With that also comes the part about giving back, and the Guichon family has historically given back very much in terms of joining and directing charitable organizations, and for giving financial support in a meaningful way to those charitable organizations, foundations, medical facilities, the arts, accepting honorable government appointments like Dear Judy right there, and of course supporting the vulnerable and marginalized in our communities. So thank you again to all who helped bring this wonderful exhibition to the museum. I really, really do feel warmed and honored to be part of this, and I love how these stories have been woven together here, so thank you.
Thank you for that warm sharing. And as I mentioned to Peter, we very much look forward to when your mother can come, and we'll do a special visit with her. Absolutely. So, Mr. Brant Louis is the third generation of the H.Y. Louis family. He's the grandson of Mr. Hokyat Louis, whose family history is the subject of both Seeds to Success and A Tale of Two Families. Each generation has carried on traditions, but also made distinctive innovations. Mr. Louis is the owner, chairman, and chief executive officer of H.Y. Louis and London Drugs. Brent.
Thank you very much for that warm introduction, Grace. And I offer my congratulations to the entire team here at the museum for your commitment in making this much-needed facility a reality. It is fitting that the museum is officially opening during the Asian celebrations, innovations, and perseverance. This year marks the 20th anniversary of Asian Heritage Month in Canada, and that declaration states, "The people of this diverse, vibrant, and growing community have contributed to every aspect of life in Canada, from the arts and science to sports, business, and governments. My hope is that you will see those words reflected in the works of the museum as they chronicle the journey of Chinese Canadians, our influence, and our role in building Canada. The story of the Chinese in this country is indeed a story of innovation and perseverance. Those two qualities were necessary for us to survive since our first arrival in the 1700s. We succeeded then and will continue to, because those who came before us fought so hard to create a place for us. They were forced to overcome systemic racism, harsh financial burdens imposed by governments, limited opportunities, and violence. They were denied recognition, the basic rights of citizenship, and worst of all, they were denied their humanity. But they succeeded and overcame. They never lost sight of their dream for a better life, and that achieving that goal would mean resilience, hard work, and a core belief in education as a means to succeed and prosper. It has never been more important than right now that we make sure that story is told fully, truthfully, and in a way that all future generations can benefit. As I reflect on what I wanted to share with you this afternoon, I found myself thinking about what the purpose of the museums are, and especially what role they play in our communities. Some people may feel that museums are there simply to protect and conserve artifacts, but that definition is much too narrow or outdated in today's world. A museum in today's world is much more than a series of exhibits housed in one location. As demonstrated by the satellite installation done in Victoria's Chinatown and at the Royal British Columbia Museum, a museum can be something vital and alive, a way to reach into a community in a number of ways. And it is my belief that museums are more relevant today than ever. They have the ability to take a stand on social issues, inform how we create the future. It is my hope that the Chinese Canadian Museum will fulfill that promise. There are two exhibits here that include my family's history. And if you look closely at the contents, you will see that education has always figured prominently for us. It is a thread that runs through our approach to business, how we support the community, and perhaps most importantly, what we see as key to Canada's future. Since the early 2020s and at the beginning of the COVID pandemic, I have been actively involved in creating a national strategy to combat anti-Asian racism. It is a sad commentary that in this moment in time, we are still engaged in the fight against racism. The racist attacks and prejudice that re-emerged with the pandemic are a direct result of the misinformation, unconscious bias, and sadly, a lack of education. One of the greatest tools we have available to us is to overcome racism in all forms is education. Once we learn more about one another, we can no longer see each other as we did before. With the opening of this museum, we have the opportunity to help all who visit to learn from the past. We have a place to unite communities and help people to understand this is not just a place to learn about Chinese history. It is a place to learn about our collective history. Together with the Chinatown Storytelling Center and other cultural landmarks, this museum will serve as a gathering place, an important part of the revitalization of Chinatown. In renewing this neighborhood, we preserve our history and honor our ancestors. We also ensure all future generations will know where they came from, their place in history, and most importantly, the vital roles they play in creating our country's future. Thank you, and good luck to Grace.
Thank you very much. Those are words of encouragement and they're words of challenge, quite appropriately. And I think the Chinese Canadian Museum will strive very hard to indeed meet that mandate of public education to address those challenges. So thank you. For the official launch of the exhibits, we're unveiling 2 commemorative exhibition prints. So I'd like to invite Mr. Brant Louis, Minister Melanie Mark, Mr. Peter Rose, Minister George Chow to come forward. Yeah, they'll stand as they wish. And they're going to unveil, so should we do a count? Okay, 1. Drum roll. Where's the drum roll? Wait, 1, 2, 3. Thank you. Thank you. Wonderful. There they are.
Just getting started, right?
So as a memento of this occasion, we actually have smaller framed prints of these prints to present to each of our representatives of the families. So I think Mr. Peter Rose is right here, so I'm going to present the book. Do we have the Peter come back up? The stories of Hokat Louis reflect the discrimination faced on many fronts by the early Chinese, and as Brent mentioned in his remarks. As the Chinese Canadian Museum opens its new home in the Wing Seng building next year, our opening exhibition will commemorate the 100th anniversary of the Chinese Exclusion Act. And that it's entitled A Paper Trail to the 1923 Chinese Exclusion Act, and it is a national exhibition, guest curated by Catherine Clement, who is here with us today. And over the last year, Catherine has invited families from all across Canada to submit documents that relate to the Act. She also has uncovered government documents which have been locked away for almost 100 years. So a few of those documents relate to the H.Y. Louis family. And we'd like to use this occasion to present those to Mr. Brant Louis, but I'll let Catherine explain a little bit more.
So when we think about the Exclusion Act from 1923, we mainly think about the actual exclusion, so closing the doors to one particular group of immigrants. But what's lesser well known is that there was a mass registration drive that also happened. It was mandatory. It scooped up every single man, woman, and child living in Canada. It was required. Without getting registered, you could be fined or imprisoned or deported. And interestingly, Brant, some of the certificates you have in your family's collection, they never got registered, those people, even though they came in 2 years before. So we're trying to find if we can find a bit of their story. But what's interesting is that people had to go into an immigration office. They had to bring in 3 photos of themselves, and they had to be interrogated. A lot of questions, and they were typed up by an immigration official. And so the Louis family was part of that. Even though you were a successful merchant family, you were still part of this wave. Those files have been locked up for 100 years, basically, in Library and Archives Canada, almost 100 years. And yet they are a snapshot of a community just before it enters its darkest period. Over 55,000 people across this country registered. Some disappeared. So those records having been put away, Judge Randall Wong helped me to approach Library and Archives Canada recently in the fall, and we said it's now time for these records to be released to our community as we celebrate or commemorate 100th anniversary. Right now, they're being digitized and cataloged, and there's over 60,000 of them altogether. So I was lucky, though, and they will be available on July 1st, 2023, when we open the exhibition. So the first time people will see their relatives from long ago. It's a data dump right now, but I got a copy of it, and I spent several hours going through it, trying to locate your family's records. And here they are, and you'll be the first one in your family to see these almost 100 years later. So I hope you'll appreciate that.
You don't often get government documents.
I'm so emotional for you.
I know, yeah. That's interesting. Oh, okay. Oh, look at that. Wow. Incredible. That's terrific.
That's my father.
Yeah. That's very, that's very special.
Yeah.
Very special.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Let me give you this, Jim.
Okay, we're gonna have.
Maybe we better stand up. I think they want us to stand near here.
Okay.
Excellent.
1, 2, 3. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Can I just say a few words? I just wanted to say how touched I am and moved that the museum has been able to locate documents. It was quite interesting because in my generation, and I'm 79 years old, almost 80 now, you know, it's interesting, the stories that we hear when we were children, we never paid much attention to them because we've always viewed them as our parents' stories or our grandparents' stories. And a lot of these pictures and things have been on our archives for 100 years, but nobody gave them much credence, you know. We said we got to get on with living and go towards the future, not worry about the past. And it's only been since the pandemic that we recognized how important these stories are, because little did any of us believe that what we viewed and saw racism come to pass because of the pandemic. We thought it was long gone. In a civilized country in this age, you would have thought that racism should have died 100 years ago or more. And yet, I know that because of my age, I did suffer from it. But you would have thought in the last couple of years that our children, our grandchildren that are now young people in this country would not have to suffer what we did. And all of a sudden, these stories that we were all told generations ago came back to our memories. And so it's very, very important that these stories and the artifacts never be forgotten, because as much as I didn't pay much attention to my family's history when I was growing up, I've had a greater appreciation for the stories that I now remember when I was hearing them 70 years ago. You know, we thought that these were stories of our parents' and grandparents' generations, and they didn't really concern us. But little did we realize that if you don't really understand your history, you tend to have to relive it again. And so it's interesting. One of the far-sighted visions of my grandfather, Hokyat, was he was a great believer in funding the future. And what do I mean by funding the future? What I mean is that the Chinese that came here, you know, prior to 1923, they did all know that there was a tax to come in. Even my grandfather paid a tax when he came in 1896 of $50. You know, but the Chinese all knew there was a tax, and yet they still came. But a lot of those Chinese didn't have the resources. And of course, they went to their family clans to arrange for their family clans to pay for the head tax. And in those days, $500 was a lot of money to pay, you know, considering that would be maybe a couple of years' salaries for a lot of these Chinese farmers. But when my grandfather finally passed away and we finally began to move warehouses, we found a trove of these documents that we never thought existed, and we never had an understanding why. We actually saw hundreds and hundreds of these certificates, head tax certificates, and we couldn't understand why they were here. And it was later discovered that my grandfather, because he was quite successful when he came here, spent a lot of his money investing in other people. And basically he paid the head tax for hundreds of people that came into this country. And basically he kept the tax certificates until they could come and redeem it from him and pay him back for the monies that he had given them to pay that tax. And obviously, as we know, there were some of us who were successful and could repay that tax. But there were as many and maybe more that couldn't pay the tax. And we discovered these certificates. Now, unfortunately, they didn't have a lot of meaning to my parents or maybe even grandparents in the days, and they weren't stored properly. And by the time we finally opened them, most of them were mildewed, and you know, they weren't worth keeping. They couldn't be kept. They couldn't be restored. We didn't even look about them. But we were able to restore maybe between 100 of them, of people that we have no idea who they were, other than the fact that my grandfather had invested $500 or $300 to pay the head tax for them. And hopefully, if they had a chance to make it, they could redeem that certificate. But if they didn't, he didn't bother worrying about it because he felt that he could afford to do it, and that was his contribution to the community. And that's what we mean by he was willing to fund the future, because those people came in and we built this country. And these are the stories that we should never forget.
Thank you. Indeed, stories we should never forget. And, you know, this is just a beginning. And certainly for us as a museum, we will continue. So thank you all for joining us today. I certainly want to acknowledge and thank our very small but mighty team of staff. They've worked really hard, especially over the last week or so, getting everything. And as museums and launches go, of course, late into last evening and today and just before people arrived. But indeed, look at us, and I think it's one that we can be very proud of. We hope you enjoy the new exhibition as well as our ongoing exhibition, The Seat at the Table. They are all a taste of the histories, exhibits, and stories we'll highlight and expand upon at the future Chinese Canadian Museum in the historic Wingsang building, currently home of the Rennie Galleries. As we move into the Wingsang building and open next summer, we hope you'll continue with us on the journey of establishing the very first permanent Chinese Canadian Museum in Canada. As you will have heard, we will be opening a major exhibition on the Chinese Exclusion Act, and thanks to our guest curator, Catherine Clement, and we look forward to welcoming all of you at that time. But meanwhile, please invite your friends, family, visit us here to experience these terrific exhibitions. They'll remain here for the rest of the year, and please enjoy meeting each other, have a look at the exhibits, and a few refreshments that are in the other room. So thank you again.